Welcome to Chapter 5, Planning and Decision Making. Do you plan? Do you make decisions? Now you're probably thinking, well, the old man's come up with another duh moment. Of course I plan, of course I make decisions. Well, we all plan to some extent, and we all make decisions to some extent. And sometimes we plan so much that we forget to make decisions, and sometimes we make decisions and we forget to plan. So we all certainly do both. But we can't do them separately. They are a tandem activity. We do them together to be effective, and we must do them in the right order. Planning comes first, and then the decisions. Sound elementary? So why do so many of us mess it up so often? And remember, organizations are made up of people, and many are the same people that have difficulty planning and deciding in their own lives. Now, I'm not going to ask you to look back in your life and try to find examples of where you planned or made decisions incorrectly, where you messed things up. I actually tried that in writing this lecture, and it was way too painful. Needless to say, planning and decision making is something we all do with varying degrees of success and failure, and we all mess it up from time to time. It also follows that I, nor anyone else, can tell you how to be totally successful in planning and decision making. We will always make mistakes. What we really want to walk away with is some ideas as to how we can minimize the mistakes, and if we do make them, do so in situations that present minimal consequences. And it's important to keep in mind that the planning, decisions, and consequences, both good and bad, have implications for ourselves, but also for others. Just a quick example, I spent a lot of time planning this course. That planning culminated in decisions about the schedule you are following, the structure of the class and the final grades, the textbook, etc. It culminated in doing this lecture and decisions centering around what to include in the lecture. The planning and those decisions have implications for me and the amount of work I do. The amount of work I put into each session. It usually takes me about 8 hours or more to make one video. But it also has implications for you. Have I built an environment in which you can learn? How much work will you have to do to meet the requirements of the class? How will that impact other classes in your family life, in your work life? This is a small example, but it points out that if we plan poorly or make poor decisions, others suffer the consequences as well. And if we plan well and make good decisions, others win as well. When others win, that's good management. And there are different levels of planning and decisions. I plan for my day. I plan for what and when I will eat and where I will go, etc. I plan for my week. I plan for vacation. I plan for specific events like weddings and graduations and birth of a child. I plan for my career, and I plan for my retirement, and I plan for my marriage, etc. Clearly, planning has many different levels with varying consequences in the decisions that will emanate from that planning activity. Knowing the difference between tactical planning and decisions and strategic decisions and planning and prioritizing them properly is crucial. You know, when my daughters were getting married, we spent untold hours planning the wedding. But I cautioned them to make sure they spent less time planning the wedding and more time planning the marriage. Setting goals and priorities for ourselves and others is an integral part of management. So how do we plan well, and how do we make good decisions, and do we prioritize properly, and how do we set goals at home and in complex organizations? Well, that's what this chapter is about. As I said before, there are not firm answers that will ensure proper planning and decision making. But there are tools that we can use to improve our planning and decisions. So let's take a look at these new tools and understand how to apply them and how they may enhance our toolbox of skills. Chapter 5, Planning and Decision Making. Many decades ago, around the late 1970s, yes, I'm really that old, I was talking to the father of a friend of mine. I asked him who he worked for and what he did. He indicated that he worked for AT&T Long Lines, which at that time was the phone company. Keep in mind, this was probably 20 years before cell phones. He stated that he worked in the real estate department for the company. I was puzzled. Why would a phone or technology company have a real estate department? As I inquired further, he explained that he was in charge of obtaining small plots of land around the country, either for purchase or lease. The company would construct towers on this land. The towers would be used to transmit phone messages through the air, as in cell phones. He went on to portend that one day we would carry our phones with us everywhere we went. There would be little use for landlines or telephones as we know them, or phones restricted to the home. You could talk on the phone any place, anytime, anywhere in the world. Purchasing this land was a very first and very important step. Of course, I scoffed at the idea and went on my uninformed, unimaginative, and merry way. Someone at AT&T was doing some heavy-duty, long-range strategic planning. I was not. I missed a great opportunity to invest in an innovative, futuristic vision. Planning or lack of planning has consequences. One sure way to improve at anything is to determine what are the things that get in the way of success. What prevents us from planning and making better decisions, like in my AT&T example? What are the obstacles to planning and decision making? Well, looking at my own situation, a list of obstacles to effective planning and decision making might look like this. Time, generally not enough of it. Lack of information. Well, really, either there's too much or there's not enough information. Emotion, that's always a barrier. Opinions and perceptions of others. What will others think of this? Recognition of reality. What are the real issues here? Recognition of success. How do we know when to stop planning, and we've been planning successfully, and when to start making decisions? Timing. What is right today or now may not be right tomorrow, and vice versa. Lack of resources, money for one. Defining the problem. Is this a problem or a symptom of a problem? Developing realistic options. What I wish I could do versus what I really can do. Lack of input. Either not getting others' input or not listening to it. A lack of a consistent process. You see, consistency is important because planning is a habit. Now, I can probably go on and on because I don't know that there is an exhaustive list of things that get in the way of our planning and decision making. However, these are certainly some of the major ones that I wrestle with, and I consider myself to be pretty good at planning. So what would your list look like? Now, being aware of and understanding these obstacles is one step closer to an effective planning and decision making. And in management, we not only have to list the obstacles for ourselves, but for the organization as well. Oh, and need I point out that listing them is not enough? The real challenge is overcoming these obstacles. So how do we begin this planning process? What do we plan? What is important to our business? We are actually going to talk more about that next week in our topic, organizational strategy. So we'll table that discussion for right now. But it really doesn't matter how we identify what is important and what we're going to plan if we don't know how to go about planning in the first place. How to make a plan that works is a topic of discussion in the text. The authors make a very good point when they say, quote, planning is a double-edged sword. If done right, planning brings about tremendous increases in individual and organizational performance. If planning is done wrong, however, it can have just the opposite effect and harm individual and organizational performance, end quote. Can we sum that up by saying plan well or don't plan at all? I suppose so. Poor planning is a waste of time. Oh, wait a minute. It's not just a waste of time. It's worse than that. It's time wasted, which culminates in either no action at best or harmful action at worst. The steps for developing a plan that works is defined in the text as: set goals, develop commitment to those goals, develop an effective action plan, track the progress, and maintain flexibility. In the interest of time, I won't go through these steps here. You can and should read them in the text. However, if any one of these steps is done poorly, our plan will fail. Notice I didn't say could, I said would. The first step is to set goals, and those goals should be SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. If goals aren't specific and measurable, we don't really know if and when we have achieved them. If they are not attainable and realistic, we only accomplish frustration and low morale. Finally, if goals aren't timely, we may accomplish them too late to really matter. If I decide I want to lose 30 pounds, I need to set some goals. So what is better? I want to lose 30 pounds sometime in the next few years, or I want to lose 30 pounds by the end of this year. Or even better, I want to lose 30 pounds by the end of this year, or 2.5 pounds each month. Even better than that, I want to lose this weight through exercise and diet. And even better, I want to lose 30 pounds this year, or 2.5 pounds per month, by exercising 4 times each week and consuming no less than 1,800 calories a day. Does that meet the criteria we listed before? It's very specific, highly measurable, attainable with commitment, and it is realistic and certainly timely. If our goals are set and we are committed, our action plan is an easy step. And with an effective action plan, we can track our progress during the year. And our weekly and monthly success provides motivation to maintain our commitment. Finally, we must maintain flexibility. If we are called away for 2 weeks on a family emergency, we may have to sacrifice our goals and plans and extend our timetable into next year. Flexibility is not a weakness, it's a tool. The alternative is to drop our goal altogether. The best alternative is to remain flexible and reach our desired end result. In my mind, flexibility is critical to the success of any plan. Planning goes on at all levels of the organization from top to bottom, and ineffective planning at the top can destroy any good effort at the middle or bottom levels of the organization. Likewise, good planning at the top can be thwarted by bad planning and execution in the middle and bottom of the organization. The text talks about strategic objectives and tactical plans. Make sure you read that material. It's important, but we will also take that a little deeper next week. Well, let's assume we have put together an effective planning process and have developed some really good plans. All is right with the world, correct? Well, not really. All we have is a lot of words on paper describing what we should do and in what order. Plans are nothing without action, and implementation and action requires decisions. We know what to do, but now we must do it. How many organizations have had great product innovations fall by the wayside because the plans are not implemented because no one could make a decision or take action? How many great ideas and plans have passed through Congress because no one could decide to vote on it or to take action? It happens all the time, all around us. How many friends do you have who have a plan to further their education but never sent in an application or enrolled in class? Great plans are only great when followed by decisions. Once again, it seems pretty elementary. So why are decisions often not made or made too late? Want to hear my theory? Well, probably not, but here goes anyway. I believe that there are 2 factors at work in poor or no decisions. First is failure to define the problem correctly. This ultimately leads to confusion. And if you're not solving the right problem, the solution will be ineffective. Often this involves not facing reality. Often we try to solve a problem as we want it to be rather than how it really is. If we fail to get the job that we want with the company we want, we may surmise the problem is discrimination or lack of understanding on the part of the interviewers, or unfair competition, or unreasonable expectations on part of the company, or you not knowing the right people, or needing additional education, or any number of other issues. And you may be right. But what if the problem really is a lack of education on your part, or not meeting qualifications as prescribed, or poor interviewing skills on your part, or failure to understand the job requirements, or any number of reasons that you can control? Failure to properly define the problem may lead you to sign up for additional training or college courses. You may even seek a second degree, when what you really need is to become a better interviewer and be prepared better for the interview opportunities you have. The first plan is very expensive in terms of time and money. The second is relatively free. Pursuing the first over the second is worse than a waste of time. It may have untoward negative consequences for you. Find out definitively the nature of the problem. The second factor is more difficult to address and not entirely within your control. I propose that decision making is much more complex and difficult now than in recent years. I base this assertion on the fact that we have an almost endless supply of data to assist in the planning process. On the other hand, some will argue that decision making is easier now than in the past, since we have an almost endless supply of data to assist in the planning process. Even though all of that available data can make planning easier, it makes the final decision more difficult. Planning is a process, but it leads nowhere unless someone decides to accept a particular direction. It's all process and no results. Your plan for an education and a career require that at some point you make a decision and commitment to the plan. Why is this difficult? Simply put, we have more choices. We have more choices about everything. Instead of choosing between 3 or 4 options, we choose between 20. Just go to the grocery store and try to decide what you want for dinner. Too much information. We have to choose between taste and calories and chemicals and additives and convenience food or special prepared, or should we just forget the whole mess and go out to eat? Of course, we then have to decide which restaurant to choose, and once the choice is made, we are presented with a menu that looks like a brief novel, and we have to make a selection from that. Too many choices and too much data. Now, I realize that many would argue that it's a good thing, but this plethora of data has had a subtle impact on decision making that we are only now beginning to see, at least in my opinion. You see, instead of making the decision-making process easier, the data impedes one from making decisions at all. We hesitate to make the final decision, thinking that the data will reveal some small fact that will further mitigate the risk and take it away altogether. We look too hard for the perfect outcome. Decision-making is a longer process today and often does not end in a real decision, but merely a reason to study the data further. The process results in no action. In addition, I have found that the stakes are higher today. When a decision is made, everyone expects the quality of that decision to be much higher than decisions of, say, 25 years ago. We expect it because there is so much data available. If a decision is wrong or flawed in any way, we often look to the decision maker and say, "Didn't you look at the data?" With the expectations higher, the consequences can often be higher as well. In the past, incorrect or flawed decisions eventually disappeared or faded into the past, and often only a few people were aware of the miscalculation. Today, everything is visible, and visible for a long time. It is embedded in the data one studied so hard prior to making the miscalculation. Therefore, the decision-making process is impaired for individuals and organizations. Finally, as I said previously, decisions require commitment to be successful, just like the planning process requires commitment. They both require the commitment of parties to the decision and from others. Your decision to seek a degree and go to college required a commitment, certainly from you, but from those around you as well. To put it differently, decisions and planning are cheap. It's the action that's expensive. Without a commitment, there is no meaningful plan or action, and therefore no real decision at all. Another factor impeding decision making, particularly in organizations, is overcoming groupthink. Groupthink can be outward and very subtle. It exists in organizations and society as a whole. We often deny it, but it is present to some extent frequently. Read the material on groupthink in the text and think about the polarization of our society today. How much does that polarization foster groupthink, and how much of the polarization is caused by groupthink in the first place? As managers, you will indeed encounter groupthink, particularly if you're trying to foster change in an organization. In future chapters, we will talk specifically about change and how to address this major impediment to decision making. In the next chapter, as I mentioned, we will discuss organizational strategy. If you haven't picked up on it already, the end of one chapter doesn't signal the end of the topic. The study of management is complex and one topic runs into the others. So we will be referring back to previous topics frequently to further explain the topic at hand, such as it is with organizational strategy next week.